Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the Lichtlaerm Untiefe modulated reverb. Okay, look, I'm gonna level with you. I have heard the pronunciation guide from Wikipedia on Untiefe like 100 times already today.
Untiefe.
I think I'm getting it. The Untiefe is a 3-mode modulated reverb with a bunch of extra bells and whistles from Lichtlaerm Audio out of Germany. When it comes to Lichtlaerm, I'm going off of the one other YouTube video I found where a guitar player said the name. He had an accent, so I'm hoping he's right. The Untiefe is, at its core, a gentle modulated ambient reverb with 3 algorithms applied to the trails, as well as a trails control and an effects loop and a ramping parameter control. So let's get into kind of the core of what it is and then build out from there. When I said 3-mode ambient reverb, those of you who have been in the scene for a while may have immediately had your ears perk up to something very familiar. And for those of you in the know, this is in fact a Spin FV1 based modulation reverb device. And if you were in the boutique scene 5 to 7 years ago, you'll remember a massive surge of 3-mode reverb delay modulation digital devices coming on the scene from everybody from Old Blood to Keeley and everybody in between. And the spin chip became so prevalent and was so kind of baseline for builders that you could almost hear the spin chip a mile away at a certain point. Certain devices almost kind of read as spin from a distance in a way that turned some people off. But I have always found that the quality of an effect based on the FV1 chip lies completely in the quality of the DSP designer working on the pedal. And Lichtlaerm knows what they're doing for a couple of different reasons. One, if you think back to that era, you'll remember a lot of pedals with 4 knobs and 1 switch. And that was kind of parameter 1, parameter 2, mix, decay, and your 3 modes. And that was kind of all you had access to. Maybe a hold function, maybe a tap tempo, that kind of thing. This reverb goes way more feature rich than that, as we've discussed. But let's start at the center and kind of work our way out. At the center of this pedal is a very pillowy, ambient modulated reverb. It's gentle, it's well tuned, it sounds great. You've got your kind of core parameters, your mix, your dampen, which is going to be your high filtering, and your decay control, as well as a kind of master volume down here as well, which can be really helpful for kind of like building back energy in a like full wet environment. Up top, you have your rate and depth controls, which are applied to your 3-position toggle in the bottom center here, which is going to be Siren, Phase, and Shiver. Shiver is predictably going to be a tremolo with rate and depth controls. Phase is, and no points for you if you got this, phaser applied to your reverb trails. And Siren is actually Lichtlaerm's take on the FX500 soft focus reverb from the 90s Yamaha rack units. And that's where the first switch up on this pedal happens, which is your rate and depth controls are going to be your kind of like multi-chorus modulation and your shimmer control. And from there we build out to things like that left foot switch, which is going to press and hold for ramping, which allows you to take either your rate or your reverb feedback time and maximize it while you're holding the switch down, and then reset it back to your kind of original setting when you let go of it. You've also got an effects loop in this thing, which is really cool, as well as expression and external ramp controls as well. A lot of more bass level reverbs will include an effects loop as a way to kind of create added intrigue in a reverb that might not otherwise have it. I dig that this has your 3 different reverb modes and a effects loop, because the thing that I found myself doing a lot is actually setting to that Shiver tremolo reverb on here and then running the Chase Bliss Gravitas in the effects loop, thus giving me essentially a double tremolo that kind of like copies over each other, creates added glitchiness and unpredictability within kind of one tremolo reverb, which I found to be a really kind of like fun and interesting added bit of dimension to using an effects loop in a reverb pedal. You've also got a very appreciated trails on and off control, so you can bypass the pedal completely or let your reverbs kind of like gently drift off as you let go of the pedal. Everything in this feels very gentle in its execution. Nothing feels overly comical. Obviously, things like phaser can get really aggressive really quickly, but this offers some really great organic sounding, slow moving effects. And like I said, for being an FV1 based pedal, I actually don't hear a lot of what I kind of feel like I've tuned my ear to look for in a spin chip device. And I really appreciate that this doesn't feel that way, even though based on the kind of the parameter controls, you can kind of tell that it's going to be. But like I said, it's good DSP, it's great build quality, and ultimately it just sounds good. That's kind of what's important. So let's get to our sound samples. Let's dig through some of the parameters in this thing, and let's give it a listen. As always, before we get into our sound samples, let's go ahead and talk through our context and the signal chain we're working in. I am playing my Jennings Voyager with McNelly Chaplin pickups into the Bondi FX Squish As, the Benson Germanium Boost, and the Origin FX DCX Boost. From there we go to our wet chain, which is going to be the Chase Plus Audio Thermae and the Lichtlaerm Untiefe, I think I'm getting that right, into the new neighbor Illumin, and our amplifiers, which are the Dream and Ruby by Universal Audio in a stereo pair. We're not using the Illumin for anything. We didn't use it on the intro track, and we're not using it for these sound samples. It's pretty much just there to convert my mono signal to a stereo signal for the amps without having to repatch anything. For the sound samples, we're only going to be using the Origin FX DCX Boost, which is a 610 style amplifier or preamplifier, and so it sounds like. All right, let's get into it. We're going to start with rate and depth at minimum, and then all other knobs at noon, just so you can kind of hear the kind of reverb on its own. And we'll run through our mix, volume, dampen, and decay controls first, and then we'll walk through our 3 modes and wrap things up with that ramp control and our effects loop. It's worth noting that here at Full Wet, each of the reverb algorithms, while being fundamentally the same, they all kind of still have that same kind of washy Hall verb thing. They have different characteristics even with your rate and depth totally out. So let's just give those a listen really quick so that you know if you're in minimum modes like this, you can still get some slight difference across the 3 algorithms. So like less low end, a little bit less body. And even less, slightly different diffusion. Let's give that Decay Control a listen. Here's maximum output. It's very subtle, which I appreciate. I don't want a ton of additional output out of my reverb. So that's the core parameters on the reverb itself. Let's get into our 3 modes. Starting things off with Shiver. Jumping over to phase, which is going to be phaser applied to your reverb trails. This is one where I love high depth, low rate, just like slow movement in the background of your reverb trail. So let's now jump over to that Siren Control and give it a listen. All right, let's give that ramp a control listen. We're going to go back over to tremolo for that because it's going to be the most kind of obvious and apparent. Or conversely, you've got access to that feedback control. Which basically functions as a freeze control. And let's close out with, like I said, one of my favorite kind of tricks with this thing, which is you can do something like take that slow moving phase, kind of lean super hard into that. And apply that kind of like added layer of tremolo from the Gravitas. But for my money, my favorite thing is tremolo on tremolo. It's like a hat on a hat, but a good thing. So you get a nice, consistent, reliable tremolo from the reverb. And then apply a ramping secondary tremolo in the form of the Gravitas. Oh, what's cool about using something like the Gravitas specifically with it is you can pick a different waveform. So let's take the reverb, let's take that reverb tremolo completely out. And as you can hear, we have a ramping waveform now. It's moving in terms of speed the Gravitas is giving us, but it's also a kind of like sawtooth up. So it's a flat curve going up and then a hard drop off at the end. And then you dial that in with something a little bit more consistent from the Lichtlaerm Reverb. It's a really cool glitchy texture.